and jams and stuff.
Imagine not even having your brother's phone number to even call him with your tail between your legs to say, I'm sorry.
He really only knows how to be a prince, a soldier and a polo player, none of which are very useful when you live in California.
I personally believe that Harry is having part of his lifestyle funded by the Invictus Games, and people are beginning to be more aware of the fact that foundations aren't necessarily helping the people that they should do. And you yourself have reported on the Invictus Games as well about the fact that people are walking away from it.
Harry's foundation just dropped a bombshell, a multi-million-dollar loss, and the numbers are not adding up. California officially labeled the organization as delinquent, and those once powerful Hollywood connections vanished overnight. Now, Harry is reportedly making moves to return to the UK, pushing hard for a meeting with his own father, a meeting that hasn't even been confirmed yet. But the real issue goes way deeper than Harry's finances. The spotlight is burning hot on what has been happening with money that was supposed to go towards supporting wounded veterans, and that's where things get seriously messy. Canadian veteran Scott Snow showed up to the 2023 Invictus Games as one of the most recognized faces on Team Canada. Decorated Navy diver.
You may have seen headlines like this, which basically say that the former royal known as Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, desperately wants his family back. And you may think, oh, right, this is a sensational headline, etc. But according to staff members who work there, there is a bigger sort of context to this story.
We know the whole thing's collapsed. We know they've got no staff left. We know the charities have been shut down.
Proud of his service, ready to compete. Then, during his very first wheelchair rugby match, his chair flipped backward and he hit the court hard. The damage was no joke: a fractured cervical spine, a fractured lumbar spine, and head trauma. He went through 2 surgeries, then looked for the kind of support that gets hyped up in speeches and big public moments tied to these games. What he reportedly found instead was jaw-dropping. Nobody had told him he wasn't covered by insurance. Active service members on the team had coverage. Veterans left out in the cold. Critics say that crucial detail was never made clear before competition even started, raising serious questions about how participants were truly prepared and protected. Scott Snow is now reportedly seeking $2.4 million in damages, and the challenges he faces are described as life-changing. He reportedly can no longer climb the stairs in his own home and is spending close to $5,000 every single month out of his own pocket just to stay in a care facility. He came to represent his country.
Harry has now decided he wants his family back and has regrets. Sorry, I call bullshit. More likely he's getting desperate, as his emotional blackmail using his children hasn't worked and daddy still isn't picking up the calls.
Now what's happened to Harry? He's got no job, better up things hanging by a thread. He's got a bit of Invictus, and then what has he got? Cupboardfuls of jam, and the wife staring into the abyss of an iPhone trying to work out whether she can edit something or not, or should she go and get another influencer to have a crack at shifting all those ladles and pots.
Competing in an event built to honor people with service-related injuries, yet when he needed real support, critics say it simply wasn't there. Many argue Scott's story is just one piece of a much bigger and more troubling picture. The financial numbers behind this whole operation are hard to brush aside. Reports show the 2025 Vancouver Games cost roughly $63.2 million for just 543 competitors, breaking down to approximately $118,000 per participant. Researcher Rachel Maxwell, who surfaced these numbers, asked a question that stopped people cold. She questioned whether those veterans might have preferred that money go toward prosthetics, home accessibility upgrades, or wheelchair-accessible vehicles, things that directly change everyday life, rather than funding a massive event. The contrast becomes even sharper when stacked against similar programs. The US Warrior Games, which also runs adaptive sports competitions for wounded service members, reportedly operates on around $2 million a year. In Germany, a comparable event reportedly runs on roughly $200,000, with about half the number of competitors. So how does a similar type of event balloon from a few $1 million to over $63 million? that question keeps circling back with no clean answer. Where is all that money actually going?
No infrastructure to back it up anymore. We know the whole thing's collapsed. We know they've got no staff left. We know the charities have been shut down. We know that the production company is basically just a, what I believe in your town they call a label, which just kind of, slaps their label onto other people's.
Contacted the Invictus Game to ask for help because they were struggling with a living situation. And the Invictus Foundation gave them a list of numbers of other charities to go to.
A reported $30 million came straight from Canadian taxpayers through the Vancouver Whistler Games Corporation, which then paid a licensing fee directly to the Invictus Games Foundation. That alone raised serious eyebrows. But it gets deeper. When researcher Rachel Maxwell tried to track down the exact size of that licensing fee, the number had reportedly been redacted from public budget documents, completely blacked out. Maxwell also claimed that government officials appeared to be keeping tabs on who was downloading those documents, and that detail sent critics into a full frenzy. Royal commentator Hilary Fordwich went public with some pointed questions, asking, does Harry use the Invictus Games as a tax write-off? Is he making money off the backs of veterans? And if he's not, why isn't there full disclosure proving it? Those questions exploded across online communities and sparked a debate that nobody could shut down. The pressure keeps piling up from every direction. The vice chair of the Invictus Birmingham 2027 board walked away from their position, and Australia slashed roughly $9 million in Invictus-related funding, with reports saying the organisation's CEO only found out shortly before the announcement went public. What makes that move hit even harder is that Australia,
and here they spent £2.4 million, originally of taxpayer money, which they later then paid for themselves, in order to put in these yoga studios, to put in all these copper baths and so forth. So much for living within your means.
This is the whole thing with the Invictus. It's become a bit of a farce. People don't trust it anymore. People do not trust the fact that Harry gets a job at Better Up and then Better Up come on board at the Invictus Games. People believe that Harry has financially benefited from that.
at the same time, committed billions toward defense and hundreds of millions specifically toward veteran well-being programs. Critics argue this wasn't about pulling back from veterans, it was a direct signal of lost confidence in the organization itself, and that distinction is keeping this debate very much alive. Right in the middle of all this heat, another move had people completely fired up. Time magazine dropped Harry onto its list of the 100 most influential people in sport, and the internet did not take that quietly. The backlash was instant. Harry is not a professional athlete. He has never coached a team. He doesn't compete. His connection to sport runs through event involvement and public advocacy, and critics say that makes this recognition genuinely hard to justify. Supporters pushed back, pointing to his role in promoting veteran-focused competitions internationally, but the debate exploded regardless. The online reaction came fast and loud. One comment pulled in nearly 1,000 likes with just 4 words, "Did he buy it?" That line became the rallying cry for skeptics already side-eyeing the recognition. Critics also brought up Harry's previous aviation-related award, arguing that a pattern was forming, one where the honours he receives seem to need more explaining than celebrating.
As I like to say, he really only knows how to be a prince, a soldier and a polo player, none of which are very useful when you live in California. And that's why you're seeing increasingly these attempts to try to ape the royals and go on these trips to Australia and elsewhere.
Meghan has to be the star and she has to be the centre, and she does not like Harry having any attention without her. And for her, this was the best an almost desperate attempt to get attention. And of course, it does give her attention.
Some people online weren't even being subtle, joking that the accolades raised more questions than they answered. The Time interview itself stuck to familiar ground sport, impact, veterans, nothing that turned heads. But one thing stood out to sharp-eyed royal watchers. Meghan's name didn't appear once, not even a single mention. For people who track every public signal from this duo, that absence hit differently. Within hours, Meghan fired back, whether intentionally or not, with an Instagram post titled "Springing into Summer," and it immediately grabbed attention. The timing alone sent speculation into overdrive, with followers debating whether the post was a calculated move or just a very convenient coincidence. The photos inside the post became their own battlefield. One image showed Meghan lying face down in casual clothing, face completely hidden from view, a choice that left many commenters genuinely puzzled. Another photo featured her daughter Lilibet, which pulled immediate attention across platforms. Some critics tied the post to swirling online rumors about Meghan's celebrity circle, while supporters called those connections a stretch and saw it as nothing more than a family moment. Then came the image that broke the internet's brain, a romantic black and white photo of Harry and Meghan together, soft and intimate.
How evil and sinister this man's wife is, because had it not been for that woman, Meghan Markle, Harry would not have done these things. She is the culprit, I believe, behind all of this regret that Harry is having. But now a surprising new claim suggests Harry may be looking at things differently. Yes, he knows. I screwed up.
Sounds sweet, right? Except online commenters quickly zeroed in on reports suggesting the photo wasn't recent at all, with some claiming it traced back to around 2017. That detail cracked the debate wide open. Critics questioned why an older image was being spotlighted now, while supporters argued that people share meaningful memories all the time, no explanation needed. Royal watchers started reading between the lines, suggesting the photo choice carried a hidden message. Others saw nothing strange about it. Either way, that single image dominated comment sections and sent speculation spiraling. Then the kitchen clip landed, and it brought its own wave of chaos. Meghan, who has built a whole lifestyle brand around food and cooking, shared footage of herself prepping ingredients. The internet put it under a microscope immediately. Commenters called out uneven onion cuts and what they described as awkward technique, and the clip spread like wildfire, with critics and supporters going back and forth over whether the criticism was fair or just another excuse to pick her apart. One comment that rose to the top captured the whole mood perfectly. "I've never in my life felt sorry for an onion." Critics aren't buying any of this as coincidence.
Child's body in a dirty t-shirt, Meghan lying on the ground in wrinkled trousers, a down the shirt shot to her navel. What is she trying to promote? But this clip, what the hell is she trying to do? That poor onion. But there has been a huge amount of reaction specifically to the photo of Lily, because if this really is a girl who is cared for so well, then why on earth has her mother decided to put her in a dirty t-shirt on the internet to try and get publicity from Beyonce? Meghan's mole, Duchess of Geeks, saying, I don't even know what to say about this one. The child is in a dirty shirt. I don't care if she made this drawing herself. And why does it look more like Megsy than Beyonce? But then Meghan's mole came in and said no mother would share an image of their daughter's chest to the masses of weirdos, pedophiles, and freaks online just to clap back at reports of Beyonce not being friends with Meghan.
They point out that Harry had just scored one of his rare positive headlines in months, and almost immediately, the spotlight swung back to Meghan's social media and the firestorm surrounding it. Whether that's coordination, timing, or just how things played out, it only added more layers to an already complicated story. Reports started circulating claiming that metadata connected to Meghan's shared content hinted at a massive archive sitting behind the scenes, some estimates throwing around numbers reaching tens of thousands of additional photos. To skeptics, this wasn't a casual trip down memory lane. This looked like a carefully engineered operation designed to control the narrative and keep people locked in. But while everyone was dissecting Meghan's Instagram, Harry was quietly walking into a controversy of his own. A New York Post report dropped just days before Trooping the Colour, and royal watchers immediately clocked the timing. Critics argued it read less like journalism and more like a public negotiation with the palace, deliberately placed to send a message. According to the report, Harry was planning a UK visit in July for Invictus promotional activities and was hoping to bring Meghan and the children along. On top of that, Harry was reportedly pushing for armed protection for his family during the trip, instantly reigniting the long-burning debate over security, public funding, and what royal responsibilities actually look like in practice.
And according to a new Bombshell report, that desire may have triggered one of the biggest fights yet between Harry and Meghan. And behind the carefully curated anniversary photos, don't we look nice? Because I'm painting the pictures.
She's got raw meat on a wooden board, chopping onions. She's got so much crap around her. She's using a knife and doing that weird thing where she holds it with her finger. I mean, it's an accident waiting to happen. But 1 minute she's chopping the onion and then she's trying to shave it with a knife. You're like, she's already done crimes against scones, Dan. This is crimes against onion.
Then came the detail that sent commentators into a frenzy. Reports claimed Harry was not invited to his cousin Peter Philip's wedding. Senior royals were reportedly all in attendance: William, Catherine, King Charles, Queen Camilla, Princess Beatrice, and Princess Eugenie. Everyone, it seemed, except Harry. Critics saw it as hard evidence of a widening gap between Harry and the rest of the family. Supporters urged caution, arguing that the public never gets the full picture behind private family decisions. But either way, the report cracked open fresh speculation about just how deep those divisions really run behind closed palace doors. The article also pushed back on claims that Harry no longer has William's phone number, and that denial alone became its own talking point. Critics argued that someone close to Harry clearly wanted that narrative shut down fast, which only made people more curious about who's feeding information to journalists and why. For many commentators, every story that leaks out makes the road back to trust even longer and steeper, because trust is really what sits at the center of all this. Critics argue that when private family matters keep finding their way into headlines, it becomes nearly impossible for anyone inside that circle to feel safe having a real conversation, and that, they say,
For someone like Meghan to come in and twist this man all around, twist him up and down, sideways, do the drop, pop, and spin, because she can manipulate him.
Yes, I think the messaging here is quite clear. There is no place for them within the royal household, within the royal entourage, no matter how much they try to portray themselves.
Is the detail that reveals the most. As of now, there is no publicly confirmed meeting scheduled between Harry and King Charles, no announced invitation, no date on the calendar, nothing. Critics say that silence from the palace has become louder than any statement could ever be, fueling speculation that keeps building with every passing week. And for some observers, the fact that Harry reportedly wasn't at a private family celebration says more than any interview ever could. This isn't being read as a scheduling conflict or a simple oversight. It's being read as a window into just how fractured things may have become when the cameras are off and the doors are closed. And that brings us to what many royal watchers consider the most emotionally charged piece of this entire story. Reports suggest Harry and William have not been seen together publicly since the events surrounding Queen Elizabeth II's funeral back in September 2022. Years of silence, years of speculation. For many observers, the contrast is almost impossible to process. These were two brothers who stood side by side through some of the heaviest moments any person could face. They walked behind their mother's coffin together as children. They stood united at their grandmother's funeral decades later. And now, the image dominating the conversation is two men living entirely separate lives on opposite sides of the Atlantic, with what appears to be very little connecting them anymore. For royal watchers who have followed this story from the beginning, that distance feels seismic.
According to reports, Harry and Meghan were allegedly snubbed in connection with wedding celebrations involving Peter Phillips. Now, whether intentional or not, sources claim that Harry saw it as another sign that he is increasingly isolated from the family he once called home.
These weren't just brothers in the ordinary sense. They were raised inside one of the most scrutinized institutions on the planet, bound together not just by blood, but by shared experience, shared grief, and a shared understanding of what it means to grow up inside the royal family. The idea that they may now be near strangers to each other continues to generate enormous emotional reaction from people across the world, regardless of which side of the debate they fall on. Reports of Harry missing a private family wedding have only sharpened that image. Commentators are quick to point out that private celebrations carry a different weight than official public engagements. At a state event or formal ceremony, appearances are managed, protocols are followed, and presence can be explained through duty alone. But a wedding is personal. A wedding is a choice. And critics argue that when someone is absent from a moment like that, particularly when nearly every other senior member of the family is reportedly present, it says something that no official statement can fully walk back.
You could have only been told that's nonsense by someone from Camp Sussex, which means Harry is still going to the media. We know that, but it makes it all the more obvious for the courtiers and members of the royal family. They are never going to lower the drawbridge as long as Harry is constantly going to these media outlets, and he is clearly, obviously giving them information.
Some commentators have gone further, suggesting that the reported absence reflects not just a strained relationship, but a fundamental shift in how Harry is now perceived within the private dynamics of the family itself. Not as a member navigating a difficult patch, but as someone existing at a genuine distance from the inner circle emotionally, physically, and perhaps permanently. That is a stark place to arrive at, and critics argue the road that led here was paved with decisions that cannot easily be undone. Reports from former staff and royal insiders paint a picture of a man who believed that going public would force a reckoning. The book, the interviews, the documentary projects, according to those accounts, Harry reportedly believed these moves would create enough pressure that his family would have no choice but to respond, reflect, and eventually reach out. He reportedly anticipated a reaction. He reportedly expected that laying everything out in the open would lead somewhere meaningful. What followed, critics say, was something he may not have fully prepared for: silence. Not the temporary silence of people gathering their thoughts or choosing their moment carefully, a sustained, deliberate.
Harry has paraded it out there, and believe it or not, behind the scenes, is completely 100% baffled as to why now, with his version of events, with clarity, and of course with his mind a clear conscience of telling his version of events, why haven't they forgiven him and why haven't they invited him back? So when you see things like this, they're not that far removed, ultimately, chums, from the truth.
Institutional silence that sent its own message far more powerfully than any rebuttal could have. William said nothing publicly. Catherine said nothing. Palace officials did not step forward to address the claims in any direct or meaningful way. The machinery of the monarchy simply kept moving. Engagements continued, duties were fulfilled, public appearances went ahead, and the world watched as the institution absorbed the pressure and continued forward without visibly flinching. For someone who had placed enormous faith in the idea that speaking out would produce change, critics argue that response, or rather, the absence of one, must have landed with tremendous force, because there is something uniquely isolating about making a very public, very personal declaration and being met not with anger, not with denial, but with what appears to be complete indifference. Some commentators go as far as saying that being ignored, in Harry's specific situation, may have been more psychologically damaging than any public confrontation could have been. At least a confrontation would have acknowledged that what was said mattered enough to respond to. The silence, by contrast, sent a different kind of message entirely. And yet, reports have suggested that Harry continued to hold on to a degree of hope. According to various accounts and commentary from those close to the situation, he reportedly believed that circumstances might eventually shift. That something would happen, a health scare, a family milestone, a moment of crisis that would bring William back to the table and reopen communication between them.
And the royals have just had enough of them. They have cut them off. So Harry is trying all different tactics. And as I said, I stand by what I said. I think this is because he knows the Invictus Games is coming up. He needs a little bit of royal glitter, whether it's in the form of his auntie, the Princess Royal, whether it's in the form of lesser members of the royal family. He needs the royals there to get the Invictus that little bit of a boost, because I believe he uses it as his final cash cow. And the royals are done playing these games. But Harry only has himself to blame because he will not stop going to the media himself.
Whether that belief was realistic is something observers continue to debate. But the fact that it has reportedly persisted, even as the public gap between the brothers has continued to widen, speaks to something deeply human at the center of this very public story. Because beneath all the media strategy, the brand deals, the Netflix projects, and the public statements, there are two brothers who grew up together and are now, by most accounts, largely out of each other's lives. And that reality, whatever anyone thinks about the decisions that led there, is one that many people find genuinely difficult to sit with. What makes the trajectory even more complicated is the direction things moved for William and Catherine during the same period that Harry's public campaigns were unfolding. Supporters of the Prince and Princess of Wales argue that what should have been a destabilizing stretch of intense scrutiny ultimately had the opposite effect. Catherine's very personal and courageous handling of her health battle drew an enormous outpouring of public support. William's measured, consistent public presence reinforced an image of stability and quiet leadership. Rather than being weakened by the turbulence surrounding the royal family, many observers argue that William and Catherine emerged from it with their public standing stronger than it had been in years. Critics of Harry point to this as the pivotal moment where the expected outcome of his public strategy diverged most sharply from reality. The assumption, they argue, was that sustained public pressure and high-profile revelations would shake confidence in the institution.
The idea was that he would present his story, they would come out, and then he was going to get this worldwide apology for the way that the family, including the monarch, some might say, had treated him and his wife so very, very badly. And this is why you're seeing headlines like this now, because even when he spoke with the BBC, and if you remember famously said, "I'd like to see my family, I'd definitely like my family back, I don't know how long my father's got," etc. Well, that really was the throwout based on that. And ex-staff members who I've spoken to at great length said he is completely baffled as to why this sort of operandi didn't work. He didn't understand why they didn't see his version of events.
What happened instead, in the view of many commentators, was that the monarchy adapted. It leaned into its strengths, continuity, duty, restraint, and the public responded. Far from being cornered into a response, the institution appears to have moved forward, and in doing so, left the strategy looking less like a calculated masterstroke and more like a significant miscalculation. That perception has become one of the defining narratives of this entire chapter. Critics argue that the memoir, the interviews, and the various media projects did not reshape the monarchy. They reshaped Harry's place within it, and not in the direction he may have hoped for. The financial picture surrounding Harry and his various projects adds yet another complicated layer to an already dense story. Reports of significant losses at his foundation have been followed by questions about transparency, with claims that audit inquiries were met without meaningful public responses. Staff reductions have been reported. Several high-profile entertainment deals have reportedly collapsed or failed to produce the outcomes that were anticipated when they were first announced. And critics continue to question whether the revenue being generated is realistically keeping pace with the costs associated with maintaining the kind of high-profile lifestyle publicly associated with Harry and Meghan in Montecito.
Claimed. What's heartbreaking is that he had hoped that William would stumble a little and reach out and need him. Eric, you're just so delusional. So delusional. I mean, really, for real. You are so off the charts delusional. You deserve what happened to you.
Those financial questions matter not just as a matter of personal circumstance, but because they connect directly to the broader questions surrounding the Invictus Games, the foundation, and the veterans at the heart of it all. When scrutiny falls on an organization that publicly positions itself as a vehicle for supporting wounded service members, financial opacity doesn't just raise eyebrows, it raises moral questions that are much harder to answer. And Scott Snow remains at the center of those questions. A decorated veteran who arrived at an international competition to represent his country, suffered devastating injuries during his very first match, underwent 2 surgeries, and then reportedly discovered that the safety net he assumed existed simply was not there for him. He now reportedly cannot climb the stairs in his own home. He is spending thousands of dollars every single month from his own resources just to maintain basic care. And he is pursuing legal action for damages that, if the reports are accurate, reflect the scale of what his life has been forced to become. His story does not exist in isolation. It sits inside a much larger financial picture, one involving tens of millions of dollars in event costs, licensing fees reportedly redacted from public documents, government funding that has since been withdrawn, and an organizational structure that critics argue has never faced the level of public scrutiny that the scale of its spending demands.
Does this not show that actually it's Kensington Palace now that calls the shots on a lot of these big concerns of the future rather than Buckingham Palace? And part of that is because of the King's health battle and the fact that a lot of people feel that the, I guess, gravitational sort of direction of the monarchy is now being led by Prince William.
When those threads are pulled together, the questions they raise go well beyond any single event or individual decision. Governments have responded in ways that are hard to interpret as anything other than a loss of confidence. Australia withdrew approximately $9 million in Invictus-related funding, while simultaneously committing billions to defence and hundreds of millions to veteran support programs, a combination that critics argue makes the message unmistakably clear. This was not a government pulling back from veterans. This was a government pulling back from a specific organisation. The vice chair of the Invictus Birmingham 2027 board stepping away added another visible signal that something beneath the surface was shifting in ways the public was only beginning to understand. All of this unfolds against a backdrop of personal and professional pressures that appear to be intensifying rather than easing. Harry's reported hopes for a meeting with King Charles during his planned UK visit remain, as far as public information goes, unconfirmed. There is no date, there is no announcement, there is no visible signal from palace sources that such a meeting is being actively pursued from the other side. And critics argue that this absence of visible progress, set against the backdrop of everything else, says something important about where things actually stand. Some observers have noted that Harry's situation now involves a set of pressures converging from multiple directions simultaneously: the family relationship questions, the organizational scrutiny, the financial reports, the public perception shifts, the entertainment deals. Each one of these, on its own, would represent a significant challenge. Together, they create a picture that critics describe as increasingly difficult to navigate.
In order to sell stubborn inventory that's not selling, sometimes it's a fairly good idea to offer something free with it. And I believe that's what's happening here. I'm pretty sure the matches are free with the candles. And that's not a bad idea. I'm not criticizing it. But what's interesting to consider as well is I think this reflects how poorly the brand overall is doing.
Particularly without the institutional support structures that once formed the foundation of Harry's public life. The Time magazine recognition, which briefly offered what appeared to be a positive headline, almost immediately became another source of controversy rather than the uncomplicated win it might have seemed. The online reaction pointed, skeptical, and in some cases openly mocking, reflected how dramatically public sentiment appears to have shifted for a meaningful portion of the audience that once viewed Harry sympathetically. Whether that shift is permanent or reversible is something only time will answer. But the speed and intensity with which even a positive recognition became a debate speaks to how charged the atmosphere around him has become. Meghan's social media activity during the same period added further complexity. The Instagram post, the photographs, the kitchen clip, each one became a separate conversation, pulling focus in multiple directions at once. Critics read strategic intent into every detail. Supporters pushed back against what they described as relentless and disproportionate scrutiny of ordinary personal content. And through it all, the underlying questions about the couple's public strategy, their media relationships, and their long-term direction continued to simmer without resolution. The metadata reports surrounding the image archive added a layer that some found particularly revealing. Tens of thousands of photographs reportedly sitting behind the scenes of what was presented as casual personal sharing struck skeptics as evidence of something far more carefully managed than the surface suggested. Whether that interpretation is fair or not, it fed into a broader narrative that has become difficult for even sympathetic observers to fully dismiss the idea that very little in this story is ever quite as spontaneous as it appears. What threads all of this together, for many commentators, is a question about the gap between intention and outcome. There is little serious debate about the fact that Harry and Meghan made deliberate, calculated decisions to pursue a very specific public strategy. The question that critics keep returning to is whether that strategy has produced the results they sought, and the honest answer, based on the current landscape of reporting, organizational scrutiny, financial questions, and family distance, appears to be complicated at best. The institution they challenged is standing. The family members they sparred with publicly are, by most accounts, in stronger public positions than they were several years ago. The organization built to support veterans is facing some of the most serious questions in its history. And the brothers who once represented one of the most compelling images of unity and shared purpose in the modern royal story are now, reportedly, living largely separate lives with minimal contact between them. One comment that gained enormous traction online captured how a significant and vocal portion of the public has come to frame this entire situation. It read simply, "Of course Harry wants his family back. They are the ones with the money and the fame." Whether that framing is fair, reductive, or somewhere in between is something people will argue about for a long time. But the fact that a comment like that resonates so strongly with so many people reflects something real about how public perception of this story has evolved and how far it has traveled from where it began. Because this story did not begin with financial controversies and organizational scrutiny and social media metadata debates, it began with two brothers, a family, a loss, and a set of decisions about how to live publicly in the aftermath of all of it. Somewhere along the way, the human story at the center got buried under layer after layer of strategy, media management, legal battles, public statements, and institutional maneuvering. And what many people find most striking and most heartbreaking is that beneath all of it, the unresolved human questions remain exactly where they were. Is there a path back? Is there a conversation waiting to happen that hasn't happened yet? Is the silence between William and Harry truly permanent, or is it the kind of silence that occasionally, unexpectedly, breaks? Nobody outside that private world truly knows the answer. And that uncertainty, the sense that this story is not finished, that the most important chapters may not have been written yet, is precisely what keeps so many people following every development, every report, every comment, and every carefully timed Instagram post, with the kind of attention usually reserved for the most compelling and unresolved dramas of our time. The questions are still out there. The pressure is not letting up. And every new headline adds another layer to a story that, despite everything, shows absolutely no signs of reaching its ending anytime soon. If this video kept you hooked, go ahead and smash that like button. It genuinely helps more than you might think. Make sure you subscribe so you never get left behind when the next development drops, because with this story, things move fast. Share this with someone who's deep into the royal drama, because this conversation is only getting bigger and louder. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to know exactly where you stand on everything covered today. See you in the next one.